Welcome back to Diehard Entrepreneur Stories. Today, I have a good friend of mine. He is an entrepreneur, a U.S. Army veteran, and a former software engineering leader who had a monumental transition from tech to the real estate industry. He successfully quit his multiple six-figure salary to start his own real estate company, and in the past 2 years, he's completed over 40 transactions. And today, you're going to hear his story. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks, Evan. It's awesome to be here.
Yes, sir. Hey, Ron, can you start out by telling our audience here about your background and what really led up to you leaving your full-time job to pursue real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit about my background, not sure where to start. So basically, I was in the military after college. I kind of dropped out of college a year and a half in to go and join the Army. I did that, played Army for about close to 5 years, got out, finished my degree in computer science, and then started working. So I started in corporate America. I was working and living on Long Island, New York. I worked for an energy trading and risk management company. And that was fine. I was doing the corporate thing, getting promotions, salary increases, bonuses, things like that. I was at one job for about 9.5 years and then moved on to another, took a much more senior role in New York City as a director of engineering. So that was a huge promotion and real career advancement. Along the way, I did a little bit of real estate. I had owned a rental property that my wife and I bought when we left we went to Fort Stewart, Georgia. I had ETS at that point. I was out of the military. My wife was still in. So we bought a property there, and a year later, another one. We turned them into rentals. So I kind of had that in the background, but I wasn't really focusing on real estate. And I think it was probably around 2018, 2019, I started to think about really doing a little bit more in real estate and maybe turning that into a bigger thing over time. Did a little bit of research into it, started investing passively using capital that I had built up. And but that was kind of on the back burner. I really was much more focused on the career and advancing and all that stuff. So fast forward a little bit in 2020, when we went into lockdown and everybody started working from home, I was able to cut out my commute, which was 3 hours round trip, 3 hours a day, an hour and a half each way from Long Island to Manhattan. And, I got a lot more time with the family again. And, I started to really enjoy that. I started to really enjoy and appreciate all that extra time with my kids, with my wife. And I wanted more of it. And I realized that I really wasn't living up to some of my values, which I said I was doing all this for my family, the career, the promotions, the bonuses was to, build up our lives, but I wasn't spending my time with them and I wasn't focusing on my family the way I was on my career. And that was a real aha moment when I realized that. And so I decided I wanted to find some way to get out of the corporate grind and start a business. And, initially I didn't really know what to do, like what business to start, but real estate came up as kind of an obvious choice with just a little bit of thought. And so that was sort of the genesis of me going into real estate full time eventually.
Man, that's awesome. So you had said sort of this defining moment for you was looking at, hey, this is the life I'm living. These are the things that I say I'm about. And there's sort of like this mismatch here. But why entrepreneurship? Like why the assumption to start a business and, as opposed to maybe, I don't know, some other venture that still gave you more freedom, like why not a pivot from doing what you're doing to working remote only or some other sort of thing? Was there like a defining moment that was just like, you're like, no, business, entrepreneurship, owning my own thing, that's the way?
It's a really great question. So the way it kind of happened, it wasn't an aha moment. It was a slow and then a fast evolution into that. So initially, when I decided to find some way to get out of the corporate grind, the thought process was, well, I got a couple of these rentals. I know about this real estate thing. Let me start to build up a portfolio and start to get cash flow and eventually be able to leave my job to do real estate full time. And the initial thought process was to do that over about a 5-year time horizon. Why 5 years? I don't know. It sounded reasonable. It sounded safe and very doable. Now, along the way, once I started to research and figure out how the heck I was going to do this, I started, to read books. I started to go on to listen to podcasts, go online to forums. I got on Bigger Pockets, and I found a real estate mastermind called the Real Estate War Room. That's where you and I met. So I got in there. I started to network with other real estate investors that are in the military, veterans or active duty, learn from, guys like you, guys and gals like you. And one of the things that I learned about was that coaching could help me accelerate. And so I went out, I found a high performance coach whom I still work with today. We're going on pretty close to 4 years working together, he and I. Mm-hmm. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And after working with him for even just a couple of sessions, I started to think about, hey, I don't know if I want to continue in corporate America for another 5 years. Is there a way to accelerate this? How can I do this faster? 5 years is a long time. Initially, the thought process was I'd work with my performance coach and both work on the career and continue to get promotions, just to kind of, continue to advance while I'm doing the real estate thing on the side. And then I realized I didn't want to do the career thing anymore. I really lost my passion for what I was doing in corporate America. I started to lose my passion for technology and started to get a lot more energized about the new thing, the next thing. And that's going off and doing real estate full time and being able to control my time and energy. And so a 5-year time horizon went down to 2. Then to 18 months, I'm starting to think about, okay, how do I do this in 18 months? And then I realized, this was, started this journey towards the end of 2020 and into 2021. By April of 2021, I was thinking about, hey, I want to be out of here by the end of the year. I wanted to quit my job. I was thinking by September, because September is when bonuses and equity paid out at the company I was working at. So I was thinking of that.
Makes sense.
I think it was May. I was having a conversation with my manager, right? It was a senior director. I was a director, and told him, hey, look, I'm doing this real estate thing. I'm really passionate about it, and I want to do this full time. And probably by the end of the year, I'm out of here, right? So let's start thinking about a transition plan and map that out. Eventually, it took me till the end of the year because I think I didn't want to go as fast as September. I was a little bit afraid, to be honest, if I'm being honest with myself. And so I kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit, but by the end of the year, I'd quit. I had put in notice. By September, October, we were starting to have real conversations about what the transition plan looked like. And we started to put the pieces in place and started talking to teams and the teams that were reporting to me, and we just made it happen.
Oh man, that's good. I want to talk a little bit about what was going on internally. So I heard a lot of the external, right? And sort of the mechanics of it and a little bit of the internal. It sounds like you were, if I'm hearing you right, you were sold from the get-go, and then you just got more and more sold faster and faster as you worked with your coach.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Thinking back on my journey, there have been a few times in my life where I had this spark of an idea that I wanted to do. And once that was in my head, there was no getting it out. So The first one I can think of is before I first joined the military. So I was in college, I was going to do the college thing. I was in Air Force ROTC. I was going to go and get a commission in the Air Force and do that whole thing. And over the summer, my roommate, he actually, and I don't know why he did this. I need to look that guy up and ask him. But he joined the reserves or the guard unit or the reserves over the summer. And he went and did he did some drills over the summer. And did he go to basic at that point? I don't remember. But he came back and told me all about the stuff he was doing in drill. They were doing NBC training, nuclear, biological, chemical, putting the suits on and the mask. And I'm like, dude, that sounds fun. That sounds exciting. And at that point I was like, I kind of want to join the military.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, when I was growing up, we didn't talk about this, but I was born in Israel, and I grew up there till I was about 9.5. So in Israel, it's a foregone conclusion that you're going to join the military. It's basically mandatory service. I mean, there's ways out of it and stuff, but you're very likely going to join. So I always had that in the back of my mind, and I always wanted to be in the military. So at that point, once I got that idea in my head, I was like, it was basically a done deal. I mean, I was talking to my parents at that point. I was talking to recruiters, and I'd enlisted. And so I finished one more semester in college, and then fucked off and joined, started in the Army. So that was the first one. After and in the military, I was thinking I was going to do the career thing, right? Mm-hmm. I was going to go and get a commission. I was going to go to OCS, officer candidate school, and do that whole thing. I wanted to eventually retire as a colonel. I remember just having these kind of dreams and goals. Ask me why colonel, I don't know. No clue. But that's what I had in my head. I wanted to be a brigade commander one day.
Okay.
But then and I was stationed in Korea. Korea is normally a 1-year duty station, but I kept extending. So I was there almost 4 years, and probably about 3.5 years in, I don't remember what sparked it, but I got this idea of like, actually, I want to go off and start some other new adventure. I don't want to do the career thing. I want to go off and, I don't know, just go into corporate America and start doing the career thing. And once I had decided that it was it. That was over.
Same thing.
So the same thing happened then when I was decided to leave corporate America. That spark, that thought happened, and there was just no going back. And I want to go back to another question you asked earlier. Like, I don't think I answered it very well, but you asked why be an entrepreneur? Why not just find some other way to get the flexibility? And I realized that really the only way to fully control my time and energy is to become a business owner. So it didn't mean that I wasn't going to work any less, right? It didn't mean that I was going to have, shorter days or anything. Probably the opposite. And in fact, as you know, it's the opposite. End up having longer days and working more. But I can control when I'm working. And I can, I can take some meetings and calls in the morning, and I can go and go to my daughter's Halloween parade for an hour and then come back and do this. Or I can, I'm about to take a trip in a couple weeks to Mexico, Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. We go there just about every year, and I will probably work a few hours a day while I'm there, but that's because I choose to, right? There's certain things that I know I want to do and things I want to keep moving over there. But I could do that. And I don't have to ask permission to go on vacation and all that stuff like you do when you're, in the military or you're in corporate America. So it was about being able to fully control my time and energy. And the only way I saw to really be able to do that, you either have to be financially free. So you have to have the wealth and the income to be able to just do whatever you want. Or what I realized was I needed a way to generate active income while in real estate in order to get that time freedom.
That's good. Okay. Well, hearing that you were sold and you just continued to sell yourself more and more, I got to ask, did you have any doubts? Like, either in the beginning or midway through or right before you walked in for the last day, along the way, any doubts?
Not as many as I should have had, to be honest.
Okay.
So one of the things that I did was I also, through the War Room Mastermind, I learned about another mastermind, 7-figure flipping. I have one of the plaques up here on the board, and I had learned about that one, and I was sold on the idea that if all I had to do was join that mastermind and just do what they said, and I would be successful. In fact, I remember I actually went on a podcast with Bill Allen, the guy that runs 7-figure flipping, and we had talked about how I'd quit my job and all that stuff. I talked about joining the mastermind and like letting that be the thing that I leaned on to be successful. And I actually used those words when I talked to him. I told him I felt like success was a foregone conclusion. Now, hindsight being 2020, that was a really stupid thing to think. I don't know why, what made me so incredibly sure that success was a foregone conclusion. Probably that I've never been an entrepreneur prior to that I hadn't, taken a beating, hadn't taken the punishment that business owners do every day when things don't work out. And so I just assumed that it was going to work out. Now, did I go in completely unprepared? No. I put a financial plan in place. I gathered my capital, financial runway, things like that. And was I absolutely completely unafraid? No. I did have some doubts, but nothing really major. Honestly, I think it was family members, parents, my wife that had more doubts, and I had to convince them. So I remember having a conversation with my wife where I showed her kind of what our financial runway looked like, and that whole thing, and that helped a lot to gain her confidence.
Yeah, man, that's good. And I'm glad you brought that up. You said hindsight being 2020. I think that wasn't super smart. And man, I love that. Emotion creates the motion, right? Creates action. And that's okay. But at the same time, I've grown to become more logical. I was already a pretty logical being, but just through being an entrepreneur myself, I have grown to be more and more logical, and it's not pessimistic, but it's more so of like, let me kind of frame it this way. I saw you join 7-figure flipping and a mutual friend of ours, Adam Whitney. And that was sort of emotionally moved me too, right? And I sort of took the same position. Well, it works for everybody else. It'll work for me. And so I put the plan together based on that. And I think where I've shifted now, tell me if this resonates with you, is now instead of having like more so hope, it's more so like, hey, if I learn from these other people, apply the fundamentals, it will either work or it won't. And then I'll learn and pivot. And because I will continue to pursue and put in the work, I will eventually figure it out, which is a far cry away from, I'll just send it and, it's going to work. Why wouldn't it work?
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. And beyond that, as I mature as an entrepreneur, I also think about what are the boundary conditions. So what are the things that I'm looking for to absolutely happen to know whether I'm being successful or not? And if things start going off the rails, taking action sooner rather than later, as opposed to like just continuing to have blind faith that, it'll just work out in the end. And so that keeps me focused on the KPIs, the numbers, the finances. And when things don't go right, taking action sooner. Like the sooner you can make decisions, the better you are.
Dude, I love that so much. Hopefully we can dig into that a little bit more. You had mentioned the plan and showing your wife the financial plan. I'm sure you had some sort of business plan as well, or how you thought the business would make money. Can you share a little bit of that?
Yeah. So with the financial plan, I basically started to gather capital and position capital to both invest, in the company, right? And we didn't talk about what I started doing, but might as well bring it up now. So I decided to start wholesaling, right? As a wholesaler. So that's for anyone listening that's not familiar with it. Basically, you go out and find homeowners that need to sell quickly and can't really do it on the MLS, either because there's a lot of financial distress, bankruptcy, divorce, foreclosure, or because the house is in really poor shape and you just can't sell it on the market. So we'll find folks like that, get the property under contract, and then find an end buyer like a flipper or a landlord that will purchase it and fix the property up and then either sell or keep it as a rental. And so as a wholesaler, you're finding that opportunity, and the way we're compensated is we get basically a spread between what the seller is selling for and what the buyer is buying. So that's how I started. I needed to position capital in order to do marketing, because the reach out can be very expensive depending on what marketing channels you use. And one of the ones I was going to use was direct mail. So it's actually very capital intensive. And so I had position capital in order to have a runway, about a 6-month runway, to allow me to market, as well as have like overhead expenses, that kind of stuff. And then separately, because I was giving up my income, and my wife had and has a job, a very nice paying job. She's a registered nurse, so very nice salary there, but it wasn't enough to completely cover our expenses each month. So I also set aside capital to be able to draw from on a monthly basis to just keep things afloat. And the idea was within about 6 months, I expected to be able to start pulling money back out of the company. That was the plan anyway. And so I had laid out a 6-month runway for both the business and personal.
Can you explain that really quick, what a 6-month runway is? Just like dumb it down as simple as possible.
So basically, let's say I know that I'm going to spend between marketing and overhead expenses in the business about $5,000 a month. Then a 6-month runway would be 6 months worth of that $5,000 a month that I set aside. So it's cash sitting in an account that I can pull on to send marketing, to pay staff. I had a VA, things like that. And then on the personal side, if I know I need to supplement my family's income by an extra $3,000 a month, then 6 months of that would be $18,000 cash sitting in an account that I just transfer, the amounts each month like clockwork. Yeah, basically.
Cool. So you really created some clarity there on the plan for me. What was the goal initially? Was it, and I don't want to be too ambiguous here, but like you have a long-term goal, I'm sure, and then a short-term goal. So I want to hear more of the short term. What was like that initial goal, initial milestone, initial metric that you had in mind that deemed, hey, this plan was a success, if you did in fact have one?
I did. So I had a very ambitious goal, and that was because, as part of the 7-figure flipping mastermind, I had seen other people, at least it's part of the lore of the mastermind that, like, in the early days, there were a few guys kind of competing to see who gets to 7 figures first. And, folks like Mike Simmons and Bill Allen, and maybe there was one other, were kind of jockeying for that. And I'm like, okay, well, if they can hit $1 million in a year, why can't I? I have all the systems, tools, processes. I got the money for marketing. I have these fancy spreadsheets that show, if I get these conversion rates from mailers to calls to leads to contract, blah, 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 all that stuff. Oh, this is how it's going to go. And I'm like, I knew that it wasn't guaranteed, but I didn't see any reason why I couldn't do it. And so that was the goal, is to try to hit $1 million in gross profit on the first year. Which was not realistic. Not only was it not realistic, but it was just way too aggressive. Like I didn't put any thought into, well, really what my goal should be is to put together a sustainable machine that was operating and actually profitable. It was just a top line. It was kind of like a top line revenue number or gross profit number. And I just wanted to hit that. So in hindsight, it probably should have been to, like, okay, let's get to profitable within some number of months in a sustainable way, where I'm really tracking how my marketing's performing. I'm tracking all the other KPIs in the company, all my conversion rates, and getting that to a good place, and then starting to scale up from there. Because revenue doesn't matter if you're not profitable.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. So that was a short-term goal. Like, this is going to be a 7-figure company. Of course it's going to be. $1 million. How fast can I get there?
I love that. I love that you brought up the goal planning too. I know that's not really what we're talking about here, but over the last few years, one of the things, or two of the things, I guess, I really learned when it comes to planning goals is, first, what's my current situation and what's like my current experience? And, to some people, just as an example, $1 million might be ambitious for you and most of us because you don't have the real estate skill set. So during that time, you have to build the skill set of owning a business, because this is your first business. And there's just like so many other things that are foundational that have to come. Whereas, somebody who's had 3, 4, 5 businesses, maybe they've exited and they already have that business foundation. Now they're like, well, this is just another widget. I can learn real estate. Yeah. So like ambitious wise, if you were to measure it, it's not as ambitious. It's still $1 million. $1 million is great. But that's one thing for me personally that I'm now starting to consider. And then the second thing is like, how does my goal align with the overall vision? Because similar to you, I think that was like one of my first goals was like, hey, we're going to hit $1 million in gross profit. At least it was gross profit. But I said, hey, we're going to hit $1 million in gross profit. But what I didn't consider was from the get-go, my vision of the company was to build this sustainable company that did some major things for our community, did some, major things to build our portfolio. And like, that was a full functioning business that could have been achieved at a certain profit number, not a certain gross profit or top line revenue number, but profit number. And my goal had nothing to do with net profit. So, I've since kind of backstepped and figured out like, well, this is crazy and I can cut a lot of unnecessary stuff out. But, for me, those were like two things that I really learned about goal planning. And it sounds like for you is much of the same.
Yeah. Absolutely. And look, there's, in hindsight, 2020, obviously, and I learned a lot about myself and my, core strengths. But, in hindsight, there were other things that I also didn't take into account, which was, what is my personality and what are my tendencies, and how does that compare to the other guys that were able to get to $1 million the first year? I'm not those guys. I'm not a Bill Allen. I'm not a Mike Simmons. And we use a culture index a lot in the mastermind, and I know you use it in your company. My profile is a very kind of slow, methodical, do one thing at a time profile. I'm a craftsman, and I even got feedback early on from one of the, I think she was the membership director at the time. Oh, why is her name escaping me now?
Becca?
Becca Shea. I don't know why. Yeah, Becca. And she was like, we were talking about my profile, and she's like, "Oh, you're gonna slowly build a lifestyle business that's going to create the income that you need." And I'm like, I smiled and nodded and, kind of rolled my eyes, not really in front of her, but I was like, no, like, screw this. I'm going to build a 7-figure and then an 8-figure company. Like, I'm not building a lifestyle business. But in hindsight, I probably should have started with building something like a lifestyle business that just supplemented, first replaced my income. And then, at that point, figure out what to do next. So I really didn't really play to my own character traits. Not only that, it gets worse, man. I started off as a wholesaler where I had no sales skills. I didn't really have any sort of marketing background. And if you looking back at what my strengths are, I'm good with detail and I'm good with basically project management. If you boil it down, I should have started off going into flipping from day one. And I went into wholesaling. And so it was a huge uphill battle for me, getting on calls with sellers and building rapport and trying to sell. It was really, really exhausting. I had to fight against a lot of personal tendencies to, had to overcome them in order to do the right things to be somewhat successful in it. And I did eventually, but I wasn't setting myself up for long-term success. It just wasn't sustainable. And eventually I transitioned to flipping, which I'm doing now, and I'm having a lot better success with it. It's not all success. I'm still having some things that need to be fixed, but by all accounts, enjoying it a whole lot more and really starting to dial in some of the processes and really starting to build up something I think meaningful. So just, going back, I would change a lot. And not only that, I kind of had my plan. I had my ideas about what I wanted to do, and it was going to be that or nothing. Had I slowed down and really thought about, hey, what am I actually good at? What is the smart way to go about this? Things could have been really different. So those are some of the lessons that I take with me going forward.
I love that. And, we talked about the milestones that you set in place, but, I've seen you along your journey, and I know you've had numerous successes. You've had a lot of milestones that you did hit. I'd love for you to share a couple of those and sort of what you feel like went right, what led to those.
Well, the first milestone that I hit was my first closed deal as a wholesaler. That one was through, I persevered through a lot. Like I said, it was just a lot of challenges, forcing myself to get on calls with sellers and then to disposition the contracts, selling the contracts. My first closed deal was, I fought really hard for it. I actually, getting the contract on this one, it wasn't my first contract. I had a couple others that ended up not being able to close. So for this one, the contract was a little bit easier to get, but on the dispo side, it was really challenging. I had a very big spread on it, but things were just starting to change in the market. So this was mid-2022. I kind of got lucky and was able to get that deal dispositioned, kind of sold before things really went off the rails in my market. But I ended up having to double close it. I had to solve some logistical issues with that. I had a buyer who said they weren't going to assign the contract again. They ended up assigning the contract to yet another company that they work with before, but I had to overcome a lot of stuff to get that thing to the closing table. It was stressful as hell because by this point I had spent probably $30,000, maybe more on marketing. I'd have to go back and check the numbers, might have been more. And this was about a $60,000 spread, right? So for me, that deal represented my first closed deal, which is a huge milestone in and of itself. It also represented completely replenishing all the capital outlay that I'd done to that point, all the marketing that I'd spent, as well as some of the early profit that, I wasn't planning to take profit from that immediately, but that was going to be kind of the starting point for, taking a look at, hey, when can I start taking some money back out of the company and paying myself and getting to where the company was paying me and I'm not just drawing on the runway, the personal runway that we talked about earlier at the beginning.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, that was your lifeline. I've been there too. I know what it's like. Yeah. You're calculating numbers. You're like, okay, -30. I've been working all these months. So really it's like -80 at this point, plus 60. You're like, and then at a moment's notice, it's all upside down. So if you could boil it down to one thing, what is the one thing that comes to mind first as to why that got across the finish line and that one was a success?
I would say just perseverance. just continuing to fight through it. And when things were going wrong, and a few things did go wrong, my seller almost backed out at the end because we had to extend the contract by a few days to get another all kinds of stuff, right? But just problem solving along the way and just pushing through.
Man, I love that. Okay, so it sounds like you didn't necessarily get the model right the first time, right? What it was, you took your strategy, you put it in the plan, and there was a pivot. How did you have that realization, and talk a little bit more about that shift, and then how you saw success after that?
Yeah. Okay. So
in the business specifically.
Oh yeah, for sure. So there were a couple of pivots. One was intentional and one was accidental. So I could talk through those.
Oh, okay.
So after, towards the end of 2022, I'm losing track. Towards the end of 2022, because I started full-time January 1st, 2022. So towards the end of that, the market had completely shifted. If you think back to that year, interest rates had gone up a lot because inflation, was skyrocketing and the Fed was really increasing interest rates. That dried up our buyer pool for these contracts. Sellers hadn't caught on that, hey, the real estate market was changing. They still wanted, top dollar even for their, beat up houses. And so I just, a lot of contracts I had to cancel. I wasn't able to close a lot of stuff. I had also hired really rapidly because, I was still, there was a point where I realized I wasn't going to make $1 million, but I was still like, okay, well, let's still build this company really rapidly. I hired an acquisition manager, a disposition manager. I had multiple cold callers. I had a full-time lead manager. I mean, there was 6 employees total, plus myself. And I didn't have my eye on the numbers about what our spending was really like and what we really needed to do. And once I started to get my eye on the numbers, I realized not only am I about to go off the rails, but I am off the rails. The business was off the rails. Spending way too much on staff as well as marketing, not able to close deals, and it was just a matter of time before I was going to run out of money. And it sounds like not a problem, but one of the biggest problems I had was I still had a lot of capital on the side that I was able to tap into. And so rather than realizing that, hey, something needs to change, I was like, oh, transfer money. We gotta keep going. We gotta do this. And it wasn't until I got disciplined that, I started to slow that down. We'll say slow that down before I stopped it entirely. So I think that your question earlier was around the pivots. So I talked about, there was an intentional one and an unintentional one. So the intentional one, I guess there were two intentional ones. Firstly, I fired a bunch of staff. So I went down to a much smaller team. It was just myself and my full-time admin VA, and I kept a cold caller. I also transitioned to a less competitive market. So at the time, I started in Raleigh, North Carolina, and all of Wake County, North Carolina. It was super competitive, ton of growth there, but a ton of real estate investors too, a lot of flippers. So very competitive to get deals and so on. So I switched to a couple of secondary and tertiary markets around there that I knew would be less competitive to try to, rebuild the business kind of smaller and like really focus on the KPIs, focus on making it profitable before doing anything else. So I put that in place. Okay, so I did that. Along the way, I'm trying to think about what the timeline was. Okay, so I did that for a few months and I still wasn't getting a whole lot of traction. And at that point, I was feeling like I was getting ready to give up. I was getting ready to give up on the wholesaling thing. And I was like, what am I doing here? Now, one of the things I realized, and I didn't talk about this before, but one thing that I was doing also on the side was I was doing a lot of private lending. So I had a lot of capital that was locked up in retirement accounts that I couldn't use in my own business. Mm-hmm. And it was invested in stocks and bonds and equities, but I had liquidated that and I started investing it in other people's deals as a passive investor. And so I realized I was kind of good at that part of it. And I had even placed capital for, a couple of other investors, was able to make a little bit of profit on that. And so I realized like that is a kind of a side business that grew organically for me with very little effort. I was just kind of doing it kind of automatically on the side. And I thought, hey, I can maybe build a business around that. And so I started exploring to see where I can bring my private lending and capital raising skills to bear in some sort of profitable way. And so I did kind of a foray into from the single family mastermind to the multifamily mastermind, still part of the 7-figure world. It's called 7-figure multifamily. And so I joined that mastermind for a bit to try to start networking and see if there were some teams there that I could capital raise for, and to start building a business around that. So those were the two intentional pivots. Now, the unintentional pivot was that along the way, and this is due to my capital raising skills, I had partnered up with a couple of different people in equity partnerships in their flips. And so I had one guy that I, had been talking to in my local market who approached me about, maybe buying rentals together and maybe flipping together. And so we formed an equity partnership and we started flipping. And I had another lady that I met through the mastermind that I had done some private lending to, who I approached and asked if she'd want to do an equity partnership and start flipping together, like with me as an equity partner, so that she wouldn't have to constantly be trying to raise money. I would focus on the capital raising and she could just focus on the flips. And so that happened very organically. It was not intentional. But I all of a sudden found myself in 2 flipping partnerships where each one we had like 4 or 5 properties we were flipping at the same time. And I'm like, okay,
I love that.
This sounds interesting. And so I parked the multifamily stuff to the side and I started to focus more on these flipping partnerships and getting them fully off the ground.
Oh, dude, I love that. So it sounds like through some trial and error and some persistence, you had some awareness on where you should naturally go, and you finally made your way to that. Yeah. Dude, that sounds like a huge victory to me. What's the company look like nowadays? And tell us a little bit about what, getting to that point and where you are now, what it's really allowed you to do financially in your personal life, like things like that.
So what things look like now, and there was a couple of other things that happened I didn't talk too much about. There's just too many details to share, I guess. But what things look like now, I do some coaching, or I do some real estate coaching. So that's part of my business. I do some consulting. You and I have done projects together. Also, I started very recently consulting for one of my old employers, just to build up another income stream to help me as I fix some other parts of my business. And then I'm focused on in a couple of those flipping partnerships. We had some successes and we had some struggles, and so I'm working on getting all the systems and processes dialed in there in both of those partnerships, and starting to be able to get them to like real profitability so that I can start drawing income. And so one of the other things that I've been learning about as an entrepreneur is like focus is important, but you also need, I'll be honest, I kind of struggle with this about whether this is a must do or and maybe I'd get your feedback on this, but just the idea of other income streams, right? So I'm building other income streams. So the coaching is one income stream, not a huge one. I coach a few people. The consulting I started doing, that's another income stream that's helping me pay some bills. The consulting I'm doing for one of my old employers now in the tech industry, I definitely need that at the moment. So that's another income stream. And so having a diversity of income streams, it slows me down in the other areas that I really want to focus on. But at the same time, it's giving me some security that if something doesn't work over here, I at least have some income coming in and I can double down on another area to build up more income. And so now that gives me a lot of optionality. I think optionality is probably key here. Optionality is always important. So just like kind of high level, the business looks like some coaching, some consulting, a couple different flavors of consulting, the single family flipping companies that are subsidiaries of my holding company. And I also recently did some capital raising for one of the multifamily groups that kind of got tied in through the network. And I just helped raise for was like a $16.5 million acquisition. We just closed on last month, and
I love that. Congrats, man.
Yeah, that was huge. So just kind of putting all the pieces in place. So right now the focus is on like just kind of dialing everything in. Yeah. And then once I have everything really stabilized, to just figure out where am I going to put more energy into to build up better.
I love that, man. Yeah, there's so much there to unpack, really. In this whole conversation of focus, I think that is probably a topic for another day to jump in on. But for me, I'll just kind of give surface level. Here's what I'll share and what sort of where my perception is right now. Here we are, October 2024. This might change, but there is some relativity to focus, right? And I think that it maybe expands and contracts. And here's what I mean by that. there's a stereotype that entrepreneurs are all over the place, which I think is true, right? The more opportunity you see, the more it sort of manifests. The more it manifests, the more you see. And it's just like this circular, we can go crazy with it. But at the same time, just because an entrepreneur is doing different things or has multiple offers or strategies, it's not absolute, it's not black and white. It doesn't mean they're not focused. Again, I think it's sort of relative. So I always use this example. When I first started in real estate and I had zero skills, I focused on one skill that I thought was going to generate money, and that was marketing and selling and going direct to sellers, right? And the fastest way to make money out of that was wholesaling. I thought it made sense. So all my energy, for the most part, I still had these other things going on in the background. I'm not saying I did it right, but when it came to real estate, that was my, quote unquote focus. The 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week, as it varied, that I had was spent on only doing those things. And then when I built a foundation and I could, sort of make money faster and with less effort and less time, then I started to expand. I did some flips. And then once I sort of felt decent there, I started doing some novations and then, all these other strategies. And I think the importance is it all tied back to the central thing I was doing. So there was sort of some integration, when you talk about high level business and, merging multiple companies, you're looking for vertical integration and things like that. So to me, I think that there's some relativity and I'm sort of slower to say, hey, you're not focused. And I'm sort of slow to judge because some people like being unfocused and jumping all around the place and yeah, sure. If they just sat there and did one single thing day after day, would they be a lot better at that one thing or move a lot further? Yeah, but maybe that's not what they want to do. And that's not my place to say. I can only share where I've been and what I've done. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on that. I don't know if any of that resonates with you or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said is even as you expand, you're doing that one thing at a time. So that's your level of focus. Now, going back to my journey, if I would have the opportunity to do it again, what I would do is start building the real estate company on the side while I was working full time, so that I can start generating that other income stream while still having my consistent income stream already in place, so that I have the opportunity and the room to make mistakes and not get into a bind, basically.
I love that. Let's dig into that a little bit from a personal, right? Because you talked a lot about business, but there was personal and business. Why was there personal? Well, because like you had mentioned, when we're talking cash flow, you were at a cash flow deficit personally, right? You had said your wife's income didn't cover everything. So there was a stockpile of cash that you set aside for your personal expenses to keep your family moving forward, that once you ran out, you sort of ran out and you were going to negatively cash flow and start racking up debt, month after month. And we talked a lot about the business. Let's jump into that personal side. What are some big things that you learned from that? Having said, I maybe would have done it different. Let's dig a little bit more into the cash flow side of it on the personal side.
Yeah. So here's my problem. I actually had a lot more than the 6-month runway. I could have gone 2.5 years without an income and still been okay. And so the plan was always, and this is how I sold it also to my wife and to my parents, is like, well, look, I can go 2 years even if I have to. I don't think it'll take that long, but I could. And worst case, after 2 years, if this thing doesn't work, I can go back to tech and go back to a multi-6-figure income. And, with my skill sets, it wouldn't be all that hard to do. Now, some of that's played out, right? I've now gone back to tech. I'm doing that 50%. I'm doing some consulting. I'm able to, the consulting fees I'm able to charge are on the, I would call them healthy due to the skill set that I had built up. So, that's played out. But it was almost like you can think of it as a good position to be in, to have all that capital. But the problem was that it led me to make really poor decisions because I knew that I had all that money sloshing around, and, I could just keep it's kind of like I don't know, I guess going to Vegas and just like continuing to spin the roulette wheel because you have a lot of chips left. I don't know if that's a great analogy, but yeah.
No, but I get it. It was not to quote you here, but what I'm hearing is it was sort of an enabler for bad decisions and bad behavior.
100%. 100%.
That's good, man. That's good. All right, Ron, what is, in your own words, the single most important lesson you've learned from that journey thus far?
That's a tough one. Single most important lesson.
Yeah. What sticks out to you the most?
I would probably say slowing down, the need to slow down and be more intentional and realistic with what I want to do next at each step of the way.
That's good. So you're talking to yourself right here a few years ago, and they're about to get into the same situation. What do you say to them?
So what I would say, I had this notion in my head that the only way that I could be successful in real estate, because I had so much to learn, is to be able to do it full time so that I can have the focus needed to gain the skill sets and to have the energy to do it. I felt like I didn't have the energy and the mental bandwidth to do it successfully, certainly not as fast as I would have liked, while still working full time. And I think that's bullshit. I think that was being lazy. I think I was being lazy. I was definitely being a bit of a pussy and saying, oh no, I need to carve out all this time in order to be successful, which we've seen other people around us. I mean, you for one, you've been in the military full time while you were building up these businesses. And so you're proof that that's not necessary. Folks like Adam Whitney, Bill Allen, other guys around us working full time. David Perret, guy worked in a skiff in a building that he wasn't even allowed to bring his cell phone into and could only take calls like before and after work and on the weekends and still build up an impressive business. So I think I was being lazy. So I would tell myself to stop being lazy and really start being responsible, be a good steward of this capital and wealth that you've built up after you and your wife have built up after a lot of hard work for years, and be a good steward of that capital and be responsible with it. And like, if you have these big dreams, you got to be a big boy and, do it the right way, do it the responsible way so that you're not being wasteful.
Dude, I love so much that you said that, because, I had this thought as I was listening to you a moment ago, and you're talking about the amount of runway. I don't think that's something I've ever asked you about. And to know that you had 2.5 years of runway, you were sort of like, well, the target date for this transition is 6 months, right? So I'm cash flow positive in 6 months. And if I go, 4 times that plus, I still have enough money. Oh, by the way, then I can still go back to my tech job. And so to me, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But the thought to me was, yeah, but you lose wealth, which I totally get. It's relative. And, what is wealth at that point, right? You hear all the time, some of these guys doing business big time, like, dude, just go for broke. Don't invest in your wealth. You shouldn't be investing in your wealth until you're, multi-million net worth and kicking off millions of cash per year, which it's all relative, right? Do I think that somebody who doesn't have the skill to generate 6 figures a year should be worried about putting money in an IRA? No. But at the same time, I don't know what your wealth was. But what I do know is that with that plan that you set in place, if it did happen, you were going to take a huge hit to your wealth, whether that was, because you had to liquidate assets that extra cash was in, or if it was cash just sitting in a bank account that you drained, or whatever it was sitting in. I don't know. Right. And I know we can talk about it not being vested and things like that, but just point blank, that was my thought. I was like, well, yeah, but you do take a hit, right? So is that a hit you want to be okay with? Thoughts
and the thought process was always like, okay, if I drain this money, it's in service of a goal that's going to allow me to generate just a crap ton more money. So it's like, it was worth it. And had it worked out, I'd be sitting here thinking how fucking smart I am for doing that. But, but that doesn't, it doesn't mean that it was ever a good decision.
Yeah. No, that's good. I love that. And I appreciate your openness and being so objective on that as well. All right, my man, you told us a little bit about what's going on with you now. Where can people find out more about you and, what you have going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have my website, ron-angel.com, that you can go and find out all about me. I do coaching, I raise capital, I have my own deals that I can bring in private investors in, my flips, I do public speaking. So I've had some speaking engagements. So always looking for more opportunities like that. And really just anyone who wants to network and learn more about real estate capital raising, anything that I can help with, just reach out. You can get to me through my website. My website has all my socials, and the best place to find me is through my website.
All right, y'all. There you have it. Ron's transition from software engineering leader, making multiple, I don't think we mentioned, but multiple six figures a year, to building his real estate company. You need to go to ron-angel.com, check him out, learn more about him. Ron, thank you so much for coming on and spending your time sharing your story with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. All right. Till next time.